Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in to my talk today on screen time and the adolescent brain. It's a great pleasure for me to speak to Fathers Network Scotland, as I greatly admired David Drysdale, your founder, and he was very encouraging to us when we set up our charity at the Melting Pot in 2014. In the meantime, we've been accredited by the Royal College of General Practitioners to run training on the impact of internet pornography on mental and physical health, including sexual dysfunctions. That's why Daryl was talking about sexual dysfunctions the last time. And we've developed a series of lesson plans for schools too. Now, I'm going to use some slides for the talk, so I'll disappear from view at a certain point, but as Chris says, I'll come back later for the questions and answers. So in this introductory slide, I'm just wondering, how many of these logos do you recognise? Now, these websites and apps are just a fraction of the popular ones that kids today are using. So just have a look. And of course, they recognise the logos straight off, and many of you will too. So let me start with a little story. About 2 years ago, we had a TV repairman in. And when he was finished, he asked us about our work. And then he told us that he had an 11-year-old son and that had been surprised one day when he got a letter from the school saying that the son was often falling asleep in the class. And they asked him, was there anything wrong at home? Well, at first he was shocked, he said, and then stumped, because his son went to bed at a regular time every night and there was no other obvious problem. So, as a good father, he decided to do a bit of detective work. And what he discovered was that every night the boy had been going to bed early, but had set an alarm for 1 o'clock in the morning when he thought everyone would be asleep, so that he could get up and watch the internet to his heart's content. Now that's why he was deadbeat the next day in class. Needless to say, the father put a stop to that. But it just shows you the ingenuity of a young man, and that where there's a will, there's a way. Now today I'm going to cover 3 issues. First, we'll look at the unique features of the adolescent brain. Second, we'll assess the impacts that heavy use of the internet can produce. And third, what you as a father or mother can do to help your child navigate their use of the internet if it risks becoming a problem. So let me move on. So a father plays a leading role in the transition between the family unit and involvement in society. Now, we often hear about the role of mothers, but there's no doubt that fathers are equally important in the child's life, both to both boys and girls. My own father died when I was 10 years of age, and I know that I really missed not having a father in my life during my teen years and later on as an adult. My next slide is, if I can just move it on, is I'm going to talk about neuroplasticity. Now, you may not be familiar with that term, so I'll explain it, because it's a key factor in understanding why the internet is such a powerful force, particularly for young people. Neuro refers to brain connections or pathways, and plasticity means that the brain is like plastic in that it's changeable, it's not fixed. And everything we experience is processed by the brain. So all our hopes and feelings and dreams and hates and memories, everything is processed by the brain. We're always adapting to the environment to aid survival. That's why it's so important. And it operates on what's called a stimulus response basis. So if there's something pleasurable that's going to aid our survival, we go towards it. If it's something harmful, we move away from it. Now that's in the most simplistic terms. But in fact, something that starts off being pleasurable can become risky or dangerous for us. And it's that transition period, that change, brain change, that we have to be concerned about, because the basic natural response can change. Now, we can also, it means that repeating a behaviour strengthens those pathways. On the left, we see a little picture. That's a sort of images of neurons or nerve cells. This is the central part, and they reach out and almost touch other ones. But it's the movement between these and the connections which are driven by neurochemicals, an electrical current that releases a neurochemical at the end of what's called the axon, that then fires over what's called a synaptic cleft or gap onto another one that creates a pathway. And these are millions and billions of these are happening in our brains all the time. And for more information on that, there's a very good book called Your Brain on Porn by Gary Wilson that explains the brain in really simple terms. But the important thing to know is that, as I said, the brain is not fixed. It's always changing and adapting to its environment. So if we find that we've developed habits that are really not helpful to us over time, then we can unlearn the habits. Now, it's not necessarily easy. If any of you have ever tried a New Year resolution to change behaviour, or tried to give up smoking or give up chocolate or something, you know how difficult it can be to give up a habit, but it can be done. Now, the brain evolved to drive us to natural rewards. So its structures and functions seek out these natural rewards, things like food, bonding, achievement, sex, to help us survive as a species. So when we feel hungry, that's the body alerting us to seek out food for energy. When puberty hits, we start getting strong urges to seek out a mate for sex, even if we're not ready to have babies yet. These deep urges are built into the oldest part of the brain, millions and millions of years old. Now, the part of the brain is called the reward system, funnily enough, because it helps us seek out rewards, but it's rewards in the sense of what's good for survival. And we'll hear more about that in a moment. Now, other stimuli or substances like alcohol, drugs, or nicotine hijack that same system, and that gives us an enhanced artificial reward. But today, researchers have recognised that internet behaviours can affect the brain in the same way as drugs. In fact, we'll discover that apps and videos have been designed specifically to stimulate those ancient emotions and produce urges to make us react. And it's not just like television, which is a passive activity, because the internet demands reaction and interaction. Now, if we just look down that list of supernormal rewards, we'll see how technology has changed and modified food. Junk food is full of high fat, sugar and salt to make them extra palatable, extra delicious, so that we keep going back for more. Now, whereas people need bonding, real people with real love and feelings of safety, crucial for our well-being, social media is like a fake version. Now, that there are benefits to social media, but it can produce a sort of fake environment. So we've got virtual friends, and it's also rife with bullying and people who are unaccountable for what they say, which in real life, if you were connecting with people, you might be able to work things out better. It's also a sort of false sense of achievement to some extent. Gaming, so the gaming technology taps into our desire for achievement. So there are winning streaks and virtual rewards, loot boxes, but unfortunately it can be a time sink if it's not kept in control. Now, sex too, obviously important for survival of the species, which should be about learning about touch and smell and listen and seeing and genuine connection and intimacy. But unfortunately today, for more and more young people, sex means internet pornography, which is voyeuristic. It's all about performance. It's more and more violent, coercive, It's unsafe for many, and it's a love-free zone. So it's not necessarily the best testing ground for young people to learn about intimate relationships. Now, these supernormal rewards are stronger stimuli and in turn they produce a much greater response in terms of emotional arousal. All those desires for shares and likes and high adrenaline videos are much more powerful and have a much greater impact on the brain than analog games or activities. So, how did our environment change? Well, this man here on the right is called Professor B.J. Fogg, sometimes known as the millionaire maker, or today probably the billionaire maker. And he was a professor at Stanford University in the 90s. He's still there, in fact. So he set up what was called the Persuasive Design Technology Lab. And that is what forms the basis of what people today call the attention economy. So you get lots of things for free. Just like we see free newspapers, it's full of advertising. Well, all these apps and websites, by and large, are free because they're getting your attention. And they can sell your attention because when your attention is on a website or on an app and you're doing likes and shares, they are getting huge amounts of information about who you are, what you like, your age, all kinds of demographic information that they can sell on to advertisers. And that's how they make their money. So doing the utmost to get your attention, particularly your child's attention, is the name of the game. That is the gold of the internet, is attention. Now, these techniques were developed based on the best neuroscience and psychology to create states of hyperarousal, changing users' thoughts and behaviour without their awareness. Now, this is why we have got to learn what we can about the brain to try and create a bit of a level playing field, because we are all being manipulated by this and it's not always to our advantage. I mean, I'm sure we've all experienced thinking we'll just have a quick look at Twitter or some social media, and before we know it, we're an hour in and we haven't got a report finished or homework finished or some important piece of work. And that is happening probably on a daily basis. I know that I recently, having had a subscription to a newspaper, cancelled it because I was wasting an hour, 2 hours a day reading rubbish that I was getting on the news and television anyway, and I wasn't getting through my work. So we all need to be aware of this. Now, these techniques target the reward centre of the brain to stimulate a neurochemical called dopamine and natural opioids. Opioids are that feeling of euphoria or pleasure that produce urges and cravings for manufactured rewards that keep us coming back for more. And this results in addiction to porn, gaming, gambling, social media, online shopping, and so on, for increasing numbers of users, particularly young people. Now, of all activities on the internet, porn has the most potential to become addictive, according to neuroscientists. Now, I'm going to play you a short video next, which is with a neurosurgeon who will explain the effect of these neurochemicals in the brain, in particular in regard to pornography. And you'll also hear the story of two young men and how pornography affected them, having started as young teenagers using it, how it was affecting them over the teen years and into their early 20s.
Adam and Gabe had no problem getting an erection behind a computer. So what was wrong? Could all the porn they'd been watching have done something to their brains?
Now there's the nerve, you see it right there.
Don Helton's been peering inside people's heads for 21 years, a brain surgeon in San Antonio, a world expert on this stuff.
I think there's ample evidence that pornography rewires the brain in a very dramatic fashion.
4 years ago, Don put forward the controversial theory that internet porn could be as addictive as cocaine.
We predicted that based on the way sex causes these reward chemicals in the brain to be produced, that we would see some of the same brain scan findings that we find with drugs.
And the latest research seems to be proving him right. At Cambridge University, they scanned the brains of 19 compulsive porn users and 19 healthy men while watching explicit internet pornography. Researchers wanted to know what would happen to their reward centers. That's the part of the brain which lights up when we do the things we enjoy, like eating or having sex. It's fueled by packets of dopamine.
And they turn it on. And they make that cell say, this is pleasure, this is rewarding. I want this, this feels good. It rewards our brain, it gives us a buzz.
While the control group got a little buzz from the porn, the reward centers of the porn users lit up like Christmas trees, just like the scans of cocaine addicts. They wanted more, and they wanted it now.
An individual that's addicted to porn, just as one that's addicted to cocaine, experiences a sensitization or an overshoot. And when they see a cue for cocaine or porn, then their brain over-responds, as opposed to someone that is not addicted.
I never considered myself addicted back in the day, but now I can clearly see that, yes, I was an addict. I was constantly craving porn. I was turning down real-life sexual opportunities, and I eventually got to the point where I was dependent on porn to function normally.
There are still academics out there who say there's no such thing as porn addiction. It's just people with high libidos doing their thing. Do you think that porn addiction has been proven beyond doubt?
To me, the proof has been there for several years. A study out of Germany, it showed that
And last year, more supporting evidence. The Max Planck Institute in Germany identified 2 physical changes in the brains of internet porn users. First, a rewiring of the frontal lobe, the part of the brain that tells us to stop overindulging, our braking system.
it's essentially wearing out of the braking system. It's impeding the signal from the brake to the reward center. So the brake doesn't work as well.
So you're driving your car towards porn heaven and the brakes just aren't working.
You've worn out the brake pads.
The second and most stunning neurological discovery that high-speed internet porn might actually shrink the brain.
This change in volume, the shrinkage in this reward area, was more pronounced the more hours per week the person watched pornography.
And that means less grey matter in the part of the brain associated with decision-making and motivation. It makes sense of Adam's symptoms.
Complete lack of motivation for anything in life.
Apart from porn.
Yeah, apart from porn.
There's a third aspect of this emerging science, which is even more worrying from a social point of view. The more porn you watch, the more extreme your brain wants it to be.
Something that I would have been incredibly fascinated at age 12 was just having no response in my brain at that time, so I had to seek out a harder hit.
So he needs more. The same porn isn't going to do it. It's going to require a bigger kick.
It started out very softcore, with me Googling body parts, right? And then it would escalate to, a couple guys, one girl, or gangbangs. And then it kind of, varied what I would watch. And I would search for things that were shocking or that created anxiety, like very abusive and misogynistic stuff.
But why would our brains do that to us?
Novelty. Our brains want to learn something new. We're always trying to learn something new. It's what we do. Our brains want to learn. And we need new. And new is aggression. New is younger.
Now that video is available on our website, I should say in our YouTube channel, if you want to look at that again. Now, many people today, especially young people, are hooked on many aspects of the internet, not just, say, pornography or gaming. They often do half an hour in gaming, half an hour in porn, a bit of social media. Some of them are maybe into gambling as well. So the internet activities are stimulating this reward system, and when a user stops, they can start to experience withdrawal symptoms, which drive them back to the internet to relieve that anxiety. So having a smartphone that's just so convenient when they feel the slightest bit bored can be problematic. But are they really bored, or are they just anxious and irritable because they're not getting their fix? This is the big challenge. So I'm going to say a little bit more about this neurochemical dopamine. It's sometimes called the go-get-it, the wanting neurochemical. And in this video, you heard a lot about its functions in its brain. So let's have a look at its main functions. Dopamine is a neurochemical that anticipates pleasure. It keeps us wanting and seeking and searching for the perfect X, whatever that is. The actual feeling of pleasure comes from the natural opioids, but the wanting system is much stronger than the liking system. So we're always seeking and searching. We're never satisfied unless we can learn to control this constant need for more novelty. Now, it's crucial to memory formation, and it helps us remember both the positive and negative experiences. That's why dopamine is really important to us. And it surges for violation of expectation, novelty, or shock. So when your brain gets used to something, I mean, once if you're hungry and you get urges, cravings for food, once you actually eat the food, then you become satisfied and you stop having those urges until your body uses up the energy, and then you might start getting the cravings again, and that's the dopamine driving you to seek out new energy supplies. But with internet activities, then you quickly get bored with the same old, and the brain doesn't respond. The wanting isn't there, so that's why you need novelty, and you need something more shocking, something different, more diverse to get your attention going. And of course, that's what the internet excels in, is constant novelty at a click. And you never get satisfied because there's always something new. And this is what I was saying, BJ Fogg tapped into that need of the brain for novelty. And rather than learning to be able to be content with what you have, even short term, it's always driving new, buy a new, get a new loot box, get a new reward, see a new video. So it also combined with adrenaline to increase arousal. It builds up in the brain's reward center, which is within the reward system, and it builds up with each game, porn video, or drug session. And the more dopamine that we have in that reward center of the brain, the more important that reward is to us. And it focuses our total attention. Everything else is unimportant. It's that laser-like focus that we get as a result of the build-up of dopamine. Now, sexual arousal and orgasm induce higher levels of dopamine and opioids than any other natural reward, because sex and reproduction of the genes is nature's #1 priority. And that's why sex and porn sites mean such a lot and can be such an allure for young people. So let's just look at some of the unique features of the adolescent brain. You'll just see in this middle picture here how the brain develops from a 5-year-old, preteen, teen, up to a 20-year-old. As the brain matures, this is how it integrates the thinking, the inner part of the brain, the emotional brain, makes stronger connections with the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that Dr. Don Hilton talked of as the braking system. As a child grows into adolescence, they need to learn to be able to put the brakes on impulsive behaviour. But if somebody develops an addiction, the ability to put the brakes on impulsive behaviour stops functioning. So it's really important that as a parent you help your child to develop activities that let them develop self-control, that strengthen that prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that allows them to make good decisions. Now, one of the challenges is that there's an imbalance between that emotional, that inner impulsive brain, and the reflective thinking brain. So it's during this period that they need to be learning how to strengthen it. And any addiction is going to retard that ability to improve their self-control. Now, the adolescent brain produces more dopamine and opioids and is more sensitive to them. This is because nature wants an adolescent to learn the skills it needs to be an adult. So everything is intensified. But the adolescent brain doesn't settle down until the mid-20s. And this is an accelerated period of learning. Now, during this period, there's what's called synaptic pruning. It fine-tunes the adolescent brain. It strengthens the most used nerve connections and clears out unused ones. During the early stages, the brain overproduces nerve cells because it doesn't know what skills or activities are going to be needed at any time, so it produces too many. But from the age of about 8 onwards, it starts pruning back. And basically, it means that whatever activities an adolescent does most often will become the strongest pathways in the brain. So studying or playing a sport or musical instrument or playing on the internet. And it'll be much harder to learn and develop strong pathways for learning new skills after that period of accelerated learning declines in the mid-20s. So it's a precious time in our lives to be devoting to the learning that we want, to learn the skills we need to be a successful adult. So this is a period of risk-taking, high risk-taking, especially when amongst friends. And the desire for sexual exploration and independence is particularly strong at this time. Now, some experts believe that the lure of the internet and its many entertainments is causing a delay in the ability to take on adult responsibilities. But time will tell. Now, this, of course, has been this change in our culture since about 2008, when internet and broadband became available and cheap. So various psychologists and psychiatrists and other researchers have been looking at this. Now, one famous guy called Professor Phillips and Bardo, I don't know if any of you remember the prison guard experiment that was done. I think there was a Hollywood film made of it. That was done by Phillips and Bardo. And he's now doing a lot of work on young men. And in 2010, he did an interesting TED talk called The Demise of Guys. And he talked about arousal addiction. So people get hooked on the excitement and what the internet can produce. He later produced a book called Man Interrupted, which has got lots of research and lots of tips. It's actually a very good book, I think, for fathers to look at to understand why young men are struggling and what we can do about it. Another there's a woman called Dr. Victoria Dunkley, who's a child psychiatrist, and what she's noticed is that 80% of the children she sees don't have the mental health conditions they've been diagnosed with and medicated for, and what they have is electronic screen syndrome. Now, her book is very interesting, and it gives a lot of the research behind this, but this is what she's been seeing, that kids are often being wrongly diagnosed, and that if you actually give their brain a rest, remove the high arousal impact of the internet for a few weeks, their brains settle down, and what was thought to be ADHD or other conditions are not there. Now, currently there are 8,000 children in Scotland being medicated with Ritalin because of suspected ADHD. And I just wonder how many of them might actually have an electronic screen syndrome or an internet addiction rather than genuine ADHD, which tends to be a condition they're born with. But unless you remove that variable, unless you remove the internet for a while and see if the brain settles down, you don't know if it's genuine ADHD or even other mental health disorders or not. So what she says is that electronic screen syndrome mimics symptoms of ADHD, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and a whole range of other mental health disorders. Now, children with autism spectrum disorder are the most vulnerable to internet addiction, including porn addiction, and they're often neglected. There are many children too who have not been assessed, but if parents are at all suspicious that their child might be autistic, then they should get assessed. But also there is some research that says that in fact some people may not be definitely have autism or be high on the spectrum, but rather might have an electronic screen syndrome. Now, the World Health Organization in recent years has recognised that gaming and gambling are genuine disorders, and they have recognised that. They've also recognised that other problematic behaviour may be considered as addictive behaviour or a specified disorder, and that includes compulsive pornography use and masturbation. And in that International Classification of Diseases, ICD-11, they also classified compulsive pornography use and masturbation as a compulsive sexual behaviour disorder. So these are recognised medical conditions. Question is, how much is too much? Well, the problem is that each brain is unique. And so we don't know, too much for one person is not too much for another. There's no clear signal to say when we've used too much internet, as we have with food or alcohol. You feel sick or somebody falls over with alcohol. But we haven't evolved a mechanism yet to say when we've been using too much of the internet. It's just too recent. And regarding porn, if somebody wants to check if they are using or their child's using maybe a bit much, then there's a couple of quizzes on our Reward Foundation website that is and can be an indicator. One in particular called the Brief Pornography Screener can help. It's just 5 simple questions. It's just a very simple test to see whether they're maybe having trouble. But things like escalation to sites that they wouldn't have previously looked at or withdrawal symptoms are better indicators often. Brain changes increase over time, even with moderate use of porn. So we're talking like, say, 3 hours per week or weekend binging, according to actually the German study, the Max Planck Institute one that Hilton was talking about in the video. And an Italian study found that 16% of high school seniors who consume pornography more than once a week experienced abnormally low sexual desire, compared to 0% of non-porn users reporting low sexual desire. Now, the brain gets used to that higher level of stimulation, and when they get with a real person, then the real person just seems boring by comparison. Now, what's porn's impact on attainment? Well, there is some research showing that boys with an advanced pubertal stage and boys high in sensation seeking more frequently used internet pornography. And moreover, an increased use of internet pornography decreased boys' academic performance 6 months later. Now that really is quite a concern when so many families in Scotland are concerned about the attainment gap. Now, there's no research been done on girls' academic performance so far, but it's generally considered that it will affect girls' academic performance too. And the porn industry is now targeting girls because they've more or less saturated the market with men. But there are no studies that show that porn use actually improves attainment. Now, there are various mental health issues in young people as a result of overuse of the internet, according to hundreds of studies. One thing, it causes brain fog and an inability to concentrate. There's a lot more loneliness, social anxiety, and an elevated stress response. If you're hammering the brain with this constant excitement, then the brain is going to be exhausted. And the social anxiety can come from constantly comparing yourself. There's much more depression and lethargy. Lots of research talking about the connection between depression and the internet over too much use. Increased negative body image, constantly comparing that they don't look up to scratch, that's both men and women, and a greater interest in cosmetic surgery, even in fairly young teens. Constant sexual fantasy means they can't concentrate on other things. Suicidal ideation in some people because they think they're broken or they're not good enough. Comorbidity of mental health disorders and co-addictions. So when that dopamine drops and the opioids, the effect drops because the brain gets a high and then it drops down as it tries to get back to an equilibrium. When it's in that low phase, there can be a huge desire to try and get that excitement back, and they'll try other addictive substances and behaviours just to try and feel alive again. And this can lead to addictions or co-addictions. Now, there are some legal issues around this, some risks. There's been a huge increase in child-on-child sexual abuse in all over the UK and in many countries, and it led in Scotland to the Scottish Government setting up an expert group a few years ago to look into the causes of the huge rise in child-on-child sexual abuse. There are things like coercive sexting, and the bad news is that if the matter is reported to the police, it will automatically remain on a person's record and can be noted in a disclosure certificate if at a later stage that young person applies for a job with vulnerable people. And just last week I was reading about a young law student who had lost his appeal in Edinburgh to have his name removed from the child register, having been convicted of some relatively minor sexual offences when he had been a young teenager at school. And he was worried that he would not be able to become a lawyer because of these previous convictions and was trying to have his name removed. But he lost the appeal, as I said, and these convictions remain on his record and will probably affect his chances of employment. So we need to be aware, this isn't just, some people think that talking about porn is just a moral issue, and it is, and it can be for some, but it really is a legal issue and a health issue, first and foremost. Now, one of the risks around pornography use too is coercive sexting, which is rife in just about all the schools we've visited. Sexual harassment. If boys are using porn a lot, and girls too for that matter, there is definitely a link to increased sexual harassment. And if boys are using and seeing coercive violent sex towards women, the research is showing that they can easily internalise that and regard it as a normal sexual behaviour. And this is leading to a rise in complaints of sexual harassment and cyberbullying. One that you might not be so aware of is sextortion, and that's become much more common. And this is when a young person is taking part in chat roulette or other webcam-based activities that can lead to online masturbation that's being filmed by the other person online. And often that person is not who they say they are, and they can try to blackmail the young person by threatening to send the video that has been recorded to friends or parents or family unless they pay them some money. Now that's very frightening for a child or young person and can lead to all kinds of mental health disturbances. And I actually met a parent who had to deal with that when her 17-year-old son knocked on his parents' bedroom door at 3 a.m. after he had called the police because he'd been told to provide £1,000 or else because he'd been masturbating online with somebody he'd been chatting to. Now, at least he had the wit to tell his parents, even if he was extremely embarrassed about it. But an awful lot of kids are not telling their parents and are suffering terrible mental health disturbances as a result. Now, needless to say, downloading indecent images of children is illegal. So a child is anybody under the age of 18. And although it's technically illegal for under 18-year-olds to exchange sexual images of each other, the criminal justice authorities are not likely to proceed against a young couple if they're of similar age, unless there has been coercion involved. Now, there's lots of underage gambling, there's racial abuse, there's incitement of violence, and something parents need to know is that they can be liable for misuse of the phone by the child if they have paid for the contract. So that there are police authorities in England who are certainly talking about charging parents if they are not supervising their children sufficiently with that. So, sorry about all the bad news, and it's time to think about what you can do as a father. So here are some questions for you to consider. Now, it's really important for you to think about the fact that you are the main role model and the main carer of your child or children. And it's a case of monkey see, monkey do. Children are watching parents all the time to learn how to be appropriate in the world. And this is a tougher call for parents today, given how much stress everyone's under, not least as a result of the pandemic. And the internet has been up 30%, use of it's been up 30%, and teachers and healthcare professionals are expecting a rise in mental health issues, partly driven by this. Now, no matter your job as a father is to protect your children, and children expect parents to give them safe boundaries. Now, this is something that's been very clear in the discussions we've had in schools. Many children have told us that their parents should be more controlling about the use of technology. That might be a surprise to you, but kids actually want boundaries because it's easier for them to say that their parents have told them they can't use the phone after a particular time of night, for instance, rather than trying to make up an excuse when a pal at school is pushing them to watch videos or engage in conversations when they should be getting on with homework or going to sleep. Peer pressure is really strong. That said, there's no need for parents to feel particularly guilty about their own use of the internet because you're in a better position to regulate your own use. But it is important that you take a measured approach to how much your child is using. They're at a critical stage of brain development and they need, above all, sleep and help with establishing boundaries. And it's important that you educate yourself about the impact you're having on your children. Oops, let's see. So, we've quite a lot of information available on our website, and I'll come back to some of that in a moment. But you need to be educating yourself about this. How much time do you spend learning about what your children are watching? Are you discussing what they're doing? Do you have regular conversations with them? Do you know what's on their phones in terms of apps? Are you paying, sorry about that. As I mentioned before, you're paying for their phone and you're responsible for it. Do you plan social and outdoor activities with your children? Do you ever do a digital detox yourself? Maybe with the family, even for one day a week or over the weekend. Research shows that restricting online entertainment, so not homework or schoolwork, to just 30 minutes a day, for example, 10 minutes on 3 apps or platforms, can be enough to satisfy their appetite, yet help keep them and their phone use under control and get on with other activities. So like helping around the house, studying, doing real life leisure outdoor activities, chatting with real life people, doing hobbies that don't involve computers and so forth. Now, one of the most important skills that young people today are missing out on is interpersonal communication. In fact, part of the social anxiety that so many young people are suffering from today as a result of overuse of the internet is that they're not learning how to flirt. And in fact, there's some research on that in our most recent newsletter that we put out, and it's on our website. There is research about how people are missing out later in life because they're not learning how to flirt. They're not learning these critical interpersonal skills. So, I'm going to say some of the challenges for parents trying to navigate these issues with their kids today. And yes, I was asking about the interpersonal skills. Just one moment. One of the realities is that the companies behind these internet activities are multi-billion-dollar industries, and they don't want people to stop using or cut back on their usage. Now, interestingly, the BBC on BBC Sounds have an excellent programme just now, a 6-part documentary series called How They Made Us Doubt Everything. So it's basically about, it documents how big companies like Big Tobacco in the 50s and 60s developed what was called the playbook. And this was a way to counter the research that was coming out that made a link between smoking and lung cancer. So they didn't want people to stop using it. So what they did was they fielded doctors and scientists who said there was no link, or that it was underlying issues, other issues, certainly not nicotine, that was causing the problem. So this picture here is an example, doctors smoking, making it look like it was okay. But the same thing is happening with the internet industries. It's not just big tobacco, it's just not the sugar industry, it's not that. What they do is they create doubt. If you have a television programme or a radio programme or a newspaper article, journalists always want to be seen to be balanced. So they'll have somebody who says, yes, it's a problem, and no, it's not a problem. So that the industries feel these people say, no, it's not a problem, it's other issues. And that creates doubt in the mind of the public. And this is a deliberate tactic to cause confusion, so that parents think, well, the experts can't agree, so I'm just going to ignore the problem for now. Until that I'm sure that it's a problem, I'm not going to do it. This is a deliberate tactic, and we are being manipulated. So this is critically important for parents to realise this, and schools for that matter. Now, as regards gaming, here's this guy, Professor Shabilsky, an experimental psychologist and director of research at the Oxford Internet Institute. Now, he is often in the press, and he is at a prestigious place, and you would think probably, if he's an academic at Oxford University, then he must be speaking objectively about the impact of gaming. Well, would it ever occur to you that he's actually receiving funding from the gaming industry? And he is always blaming other conditions, underlying conditions, as the cause of the harms arising from compulsive and addictive gaming. He never mentions the World Health Organization or the fact that it's now been regarded as an addictive disorder. On Twitter, he supports consultants for the porn industry, who likewise never blame pornography for the harm that develops from overuse of these internet activities. And this includes, he supports this guy, Dr. David Lay, who's a sexologist, who is paid as a consultant to strip chat part of one of the largest porn companies, X-Hamster, who says that pornography is never addictive, or if it's problematic for some, they have underlying issues. Never blaming the impact that the internet has, or pornography or gaming have on the reward centre, and how it's constantly, with each hit, constantly causing huge hits of dopamine and opioids that strengthen these brain pathways that lead to addiction. And these are exactly the same tactics that were used by Big Tobacco back in the day. Now, the other problem for parents in dealing with, say, something like pornography and the harms that may come from compulsive use is that children are looking at porn and they're thinking, so that's what I should do. They're learning these sexual scripts, that's what porn's about. And you think, well, as a parent, if I just say to my kids, but that's not what real sex is like. If you're in a relationship, it's not swinging from the lampshades all the time. It's a wee bit different. And you don't have to have multiple partners to have a good time. You actually can have a decent relationship with one person. That's good up to a point. The challenge is the unconscious learning that's going on. While at conscious learning, they can look at it and say, that's what I should do, as they say, learn the sexual scripts. At an unconscious level, they are constantly telling their brain, and their brain is learning that this is what I need to turn me on. I need porn to get aroused. And these are caused by physical brain changes. And it's this sexual conditioning that is a problem. As soon as a child looks at, as soon as puberty hits, the first time that a child looks or experiences sex to the point of arousal and orgasm, that creates an imprint in the brain. Now, if they're just thinking about somebody they fancy at school, or a picture they've seen in a magazine, or something in a film, that will create a particular imprint. But if the child is looking at hardcore pornography, which is most of what they're seeing on the internet, particularly programs like Pornhub or platforms like that, then it's hardcore pornography, and that is creating a really deep imprint in the brain, and it's sexually conditioning the brain. It's programming the brain to need much harder arousal than they would get if they just fancied a girl in their class or were sexually attracted in the normal way. And that's what's leading to a lack of interest in real relationship, or lack of satisfaction from sexual relationships further down the line. So what can we do about this? Well, we have a free parent's guide to internet pornography on our website that's updated on a regular basis, and that's got lots of videos and recommendations for books and articles and tips and things that you can use. These are recovery sites, so these are rebootnation.org, NoFap, Your Brain on Porn. These are excellent ones specifically for pornography, and our website too, of course. But they give lots of useful tips and hints, and they're largely free. They're anonymous, so if people are embarrassed that they might have an issue, they can go on there and they get tons of advice. There's lots of peer group coaching, and NoFap in particular is particularly popular. There's the Gambling Commission with tools to help you get under control time and money being spent, and there's a Cyber Addiction Recovery Centre that deals more widely with things. So to end, I mentioned stimulus and response. This is how our brain responds to the environment. And this Viktor Frankl, some of you may know him, who was a Holocaust survivor and is a psychiatrist, and he said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The good news is that because we understand more about neuroplasticity, we can learn how to strengthen our brain and build resilience against compulsion and addiction. The clue here is in the words of that famous psychiatrist. So thank you very much for your attention, and good luck.